Well.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I draw the House's attention to my outside interests, which are set out in the Register, and it's a huge pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady for St Helens South and Wiston in the very sensible speech she's just made, which underlines the unity across the House in facing this extraordinary and unjustifiable aggression by a member, Mr Deputy Speaker, of the Permanent Five at the United Nations, tearing up 75 years of the international rules-based system in contravention of everything the UN has said in the past and stood for, and the growth of international law. And Mr Deputy Speaker, everyone in the House and in the country will be haunted by the plight of the refugees, which is impossible to find words to set out or explain. But for many of us it will be the little girl, aged 10, terrified, her eyes wide with fear, clutching her cat as she came over the border from Ukraine. And we must hope, as William Hague so eloquently said in the Times today, that a hollow structure that will lose its reputation and respect very quickly when its thieving and selfish reality is revealed to its own people. It may take months or years, but Putin's henchmen will be well advised to start thinking about their escape route to Pyongyang, and the whole House will agree with our former colleague. The Chinese have already today referred to the invasion as I quote, an irreversible mistake, and many of us this afternoon have saluted the quite extraordinary bravery within Russia, ordinary people standing up to this bullying maniac. And I want to express my strong support and indeed congratulations to the government, and in particular the Department for Defence, on giving the Ukrainians both hope and some military muscle without starting World War III, and also on the coordination across the Western world, across the European states on economic sanctions and isolating Russia economically. Now, I mainly want to talk, Mr Deputy Speaker, about the humanitarian position, but we have on that no need to look in the crystal ball. We can read the book of what happened in Syria, and the House may recall that Joe Cox and I co-chaired the Friends of Syria and indeed held more than, I think, 2 emergency debates in this House. And if you want to know what the Russians are going to do to these cities in great peril in Ukraine, look no further than what they did in Aleppo, where, like the Nazis in Guernica in 1937, they bombed Aleppo, one of the great cities of the world, back to the Stone Age. Indiscriminate attacks on hospitals. Imagine the bravery, Mr Deputy Speaker, of the men and women, the doctors and clinicians working in those hospitals in Ukraine, who know from Syria exactly what fate may await them. The massive breaches of the rules of war and international humanitarian law. And let us be in no mistake, the danger of a use of chemical weapons, a danger that was greatly enhanced when President Obama told the Russians that if they used chemical weapons, they would cross a red line and action would be taken. And yet when they did cross that line, no action was taken at all. And remember too, Mr Deputy Speaker, the sheer numbers who are on the move. In Syria, there were 5 million internally displaced, 5 million outside in the surrounding countries. 10 million people out of a population of 20 million, and it shows the scale of what may now be facing us. And it seems to me that the critical thing in humanitarian terms is that there should be a seamless approach, all of Europe and NATO, fair burden sharing with the frontline states, in or out of the European Union, total solidarity with those frontline states. I will.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Speaking as someone that has dealt practically with refugees and displaced persons, we should be putting our bureaus, our offices, right up at the border with Ukraine, in Poland perhaps, and as people come across, we should be actually guiding them, helping them and protecting them, and perhaps giving them some sort of help to get to the UK or elsewhere. The European Union should be doing that. We should all be doing that. We should be doing it with the International Committee of the Red Cross and the UNHCR.
My honourable and gallant friend who made such a great speech earlier in this debate is absolutely right. Total solidarity with the frontline states, our European friends and partners, in tackling this quite extraordinary crisis. And the second thing, Mr Deputy Speaker, in terms of the humanitarian position, is that we must underline that there will be no impunity. I remember in the National Security Council on Syria the commitment of the Foreign Office to collect evidence of crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity by individual Russian and Syrian soldiers inside Syria. And we must go after all of those, not only who fire on civilians, but those who give the order to fire on civilians, no matter how long it takes, wherever they hide. In Bosnia, we showed we could go after these murderous people, and they must be caught and put before due process. And the use of social media, of course, will make it so much easier to get evidence that will then defy impunity, but also to get the message across to ordinary Russian conscripts serving there, those who give the command, those who exercise the command, of the deep jeopardy they will be in, no matter how long it takes when this is all over. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the final point I want to make is to caution the House on any sense that these humanitarian corridors are likely to be much of an answer. I'm afraid too often they are not what they appear. There are huge dangers in apparently separating humanitarian from non-humanitarian space. They are, by definition, geographically limited and undermine obligations under international humanitarian law, both to allow civilians to reach safety from areas of fighting and the ability of aid to reach those in need. We learnt in Syria that Russia uses them to advance their military strategy. They have cynically used them to distract and manipulate, emptying an area for military gain rather than humanitarian support. They create an illusory sense of security and should in any event be run by the ICRC. They are used as an instrument of public relations and not humanitarian support, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I caution the House, when they hear about humanitarian corridors, they are not safe and they are only a very partial part of the answer. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we've heard calls this afternoon for NATO to be rejuvenated, and it is being. We've heard about the increased necessity for defence expenditure, which I entirely endorse. I thought the words of the former Foreign Secretary, our colleague from South West Surrey at the weekend, were absolutely right. This is a terrible crisis, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We must stand together on the economic sanctions and on the support for the Ukrainians, and we must hope that our former colleague, William Hague, is correct.
Sam Tarry.